Good morning, Chairman. We are now live.
This morning. I do apologise for not pressing the button sufficiently. So if we can commence, please, as it's now 10. So item 1, Thomas, we have apologies for absence. Thank you.
Thank you. We have apologies from Councillors King and Coupland and Ian Haldenbury.
And then we move on, members, to item 2, which is declaration of interest. Does anyone have any declarations to make at this stage? No, I don't think that's a no, thank you. And item 3, which is the minutes of the Audit Committee meeting of the 22nd. Could I have a proposer and seconder, assuming everybody agrees? Thank you both. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move to item 4, which is the annual governance statement. And obviously this is an important document because this sort of lays out what we've done over the period since last year, but it's obviously should be a no surprises document, which I'm sure it won't be. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the final version of the governance statement for 23-24. There have been no changes to the draft version that came to you that was approved in June. So it's exactly the same document. As the format and the content from what previously used to be brought to the committee has slightly changed, and we're now focusing just on governance, what I would like to propose is that we only bring it once, and we bring it once to you in June, and then we bring any changes by exception. Those changes are more than likely come through external audit observations or any serious material changes that arise as before we get to producing the financial accounts. So it will just come once in June, if that's all right with everybody, and that's to make sure that we're just not taking up agenda space for the meeting.
Thank you, Claire. I'm sure that's acceptable to everyone. Bearing in mind there's no need to go through things twice, having approved them once, subject to any changes. Andrew, thank you.
Well, to make it worthwhile you're coming, Claire. Yes, I was struck, as I was last time, but when I read it again, the 165 schools currently without an audit regime process system. Obviously, that grates on people with an audit perspective, doesn't it? Because who knows what might be there to be discovered. How is that initiative going, and how will smallish schools be supported, trained, resource enhanced, or whatever?
So we're making really good progress. We've got an established schools and academies team. We're working very well with the assistant director and heads of service within children's services. So we're doing a lot of combined delivery of communications and training. And I think from memory, we've got the number of schools that haven't been audited in the last 3 years down to about 80 to 85. So we're making significant progress. We have a 2-year plan, so this year and next year, to make sure that we cover all of those 85 that haven't been audited, and then that gives us a risk base to take forward as to what that looks like. We are also working with our education colleagues to make some amendments to how that's communicated to the schools and what their responsibilities are in relation to the provision for audit services as well.
I still remember vividly 1993 when colleges were invited to exit local government, and audit was barely a word we understood. I personally took ownership of that, and it was a hell of a lot of work in the first instance. But the comfort going forward from knowing you had robust systems that could withstand challenge and scrutiny was immensely valuable, and it lasted me the next 15 years. Is that impact happening? Do schools embrace this with, well, we now feel much more confident, we've got a grip of our own procedures, controls, etc.?
So again, we're very fortunate that our education colleagues see the value in what we do. So they encourage all changes within schools. If a new head teacher, a new business manager, they're all encouraged to have an internal audit, even if they've had one, because they see the value of it. I would say 98% of the feedback we get from schools is, this was brilliant, it wasn't done to. We take them on the journey and we encourage them of the importance of the Get Well plan as opposed to the actual assurance rating. There are a couple that we need still to work with, and we're working with those individual governing bodies to raise the importance of an audit and the importance of that get well plan, because it's not just about what we find, it's about the process they go through to reduce those risks that sit there for the council as well as for the schools. So I would say on the whole we are making really good progress. As you say, it's a lot of hard work to start with, but I've got a really good team. We're now at full capacity, so our new staff start next week, so that we will have a full team to be able to deliver that risk profile across the maintained school piece.
That's very assuring, and I like the title, Get Well Plan.
Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. Just picking up the other area of weakness, which is a bit of a chestnut one. IT, I'm glad to see that A has been recognised, but that's not surprising perhaps, because of the issues associated with IT, and that we are putting money and resources into it. So I've got two questions that come with that. How do we actually measure, and is it possible to even do that, the improvements that will come from the additional investment in terms of money and resources? Or is this something that's going to be perpetually brought forward because of the very nature of IT and the pressures that exist in terms of tackling organisational IT issues?
So I think answering that from an audit perspective, we are working closely with the newly appointed Head of Services and Assistant Director to make sure that our audit plan and the assurance that comes from our audit plan aligns with their project delivery and their programmes. So we have a mutual agreement of which areas we're going to look at and the level of resource that we're buying that in for and which framework we're using for that. So that's a piece of work that we're co-sourcing with somebody else because we don't have the expertise in the team to deliver that. And again, a bit like the schools programme, IT have been very on board with what we want to deliver. The new Assistant Director is very used to working with internal audit and understands the value and the respect that goes with it. For us, it will be easy to track the progress because currently there's minimal independent assurance. And from our perspective for the governance statement, it's about independent assurance and not just reliant on self-assessment, it's reliant upon that independent assessment with somebody in an objective position giving a view on where we are. We also couple that with the risk work that happens with the risk team so that we're aware of the progress they are making in relation to identifying their risks, dealing with their risks and their programme of development they've got across the council. They've got quite an extensive planned programme of works over a number of years. And again, we keep our assurance voice and eyes on top of that from a risk and assurance perspective. I think I've answered your question.
Well, if I could just come back on that, Claire. So the process, making sure processes are there, that do provide that independent view is certainly, the first stage, I would think, in terms of bringing improvements, if that's the word, to the risks associated with IT and IT delivery. But how is that measured then? So you can measure it in terms of the processes being there, but how do we then measure that the improvements are taking place, so that the processes you put in place, do provide more assurance, should we say, and a greater view that any risks associated with IT are being addressed?
So without getting into the specifics, we do some testing. So we look at vulnerability testing, we look at penetration testing, we look at making sure that the training that's given to staff is understood by them. And we have various ways of doing that. Obviously, we can't fill in all the blanks, but we do have specific ways in which we test what the understanding is across the organisation and how well people understand the implications if they don't follow what's been done, as well as looking at training records and that general understanding. So one of the things we look at is about sufficiency of capacity and capability within the area, and also looking at the level of reliance interlinked across different areas of the council and seeing what the risks are for the wider interlinked links as well.
Thank you, Mark. Andrew, you indicated you would like to.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'll give a management view as well, obviously as the director responsible for IT. So, as Claire's reflected, there's a completely new leadership team in there at the moment. They've brought a lot of challenge and new ideas to the function, which is really positive to see. And obviously already starting to repay that investment that we've made in them. We're in the process of starting to implement a 15 project programme to uplift our capabilities and infrastructure and all of that good stuff at the moment. I think one of the key bits to answer Councillor Allen's question is around the move to the new IT contract. So we're currently coming to an end of our arrangement with Serco at the moment, and we are now out to market at this moment in time actually around a new contractual arrangement from the 1st of April 2026. And one of the key aspects of that is the concept of an evergreen service. So whereas in the past we might have had bought some infrastructure kit and then there hasn't been a particular there's been an expected point where we'd replace it, but maybe haven't replaced it at that exact time because of capacity and all of everything else that's been going on. The contractual mechanism will just naturally ensure things are replaced at the right time. So that's, I think, addresses some of your challenge. I think the other bit as well is we work with other IT organisations where we can test ourselves against a benchmark. Gartner's a good example where we can measure our maturity, and we are looking about how we can track our journey from where we are now to where we want to be as part of that new contractual arrangement. So definitely a journey that we're on, but one that we've got a lot of capacity and thought power going into trying to resolve past challenges that we faced. Okay.
Thank you, Andrew. That's very informative and gives us a good overview of where we are. If I could just, perhaps, I don't know whether Michelle would be interested in answering this question for me. Just on the, obviously the account closure this year, we just had a little bit of a delay because of the new financial system. I think in terms of the fixed assets again, Michelle, wasn't it? Complicated area. The problem is if you change one item in the fixed assets, it changes everything in the accounts, but it makes very little difference to the bottom line, shall we say, in material terms. So could you just give us some assurances about how we're looking for this year, and also obviously how Asphalt will probably address that in his report as well.
The issue that delayed the draft accounts being published was indeed around fixed assets. The reason for that was some of the balances that have been transferred over during the migration to the new system. The fixed assets have been done last, which effectively meant we had a year's worth of work to do in a few weeks, and then run some processes at the end of that. It was the processes that we run at the end of that to assign depreciation that there were some problems with. Those problems have now been addressed. We've worked with Hoople to correct the errors that was being generated, and there's work done, and there's been testing on all of that. So we're confident that process is going to run fine this year, and we can try it early if we need to. So, and the work that obviously needs to be done over the year is being done over the year now, rather than just concentrating it all at the end. So hopefully that should be okay for this year.
Members? No. I think that's very comprehensive. Again, we've addressed this previously. So do I have a proposer and a seconder for the recommendations that we accept this report? Thank you. Those in favour? Thank you. This is carried. So, okay, so if we can now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the statement of accounts. I want to get the right page on. Okay. So if we're looking at the update on the statement of accounts and external audit of the accounts. If I can pass over to Michelle once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. This report provided an update on both the statement of accounts and the external audits for 23-24 for both Lincolnshire County Council and the Lincolnshire Pension Fund. Any adjustments made to the statement of accounts at this point in time mainly related to presentation adjustments, which have been outlined within the body of the report. A copy of both the updated statement of accounts could be found within the appendices. As the external audit is still ongoing at the moment for LCC, and the Lincolnshire Pension Fund audit wasn't yet complete at the time the report was prepared, you've been provided with an external audit progress report for each audit from KPMG. Again, a copy of these reports could be found within the appendices. Rashpal has kindly attended the meeting today and can provide an update on the audits to date or answer any questions you may have around that.
Thank you, Claire. Andrew.
Yeah, on page 32, the significant adjustments. Note 15B, capital commitments. In the grand scheme of capital projects, 4.8 million might not seem a lot, but whenever there's an additional capital commitment required of 4.8 million, I've got to ask, was that foreseeable? Were systems and controls in place to alert to changing costs and complications or whatever the root cause was? And does it say something about future planning and pricing of capital projects?
So I'll take this one, Chairman, if that's all right. So this is a note to the account where we just basically provide a list of the current major projects in the programme to highlight what they are. I think hopefully provide some reassurances is this project was in our approved capital programme. It's been through all of the governance process to get it into the capital programme. The scheme's been reviewed and through a key decision process, so has been stringently adhered to through all of the key decision making and budgeting. I think this is just a note in the accounts that just lists them basically, and it was omitted as part of that list. So hopefully that provides some assurance that it's been through the right governance.
Perhaps I'm missing something. Is it costing 4.8 million more than you originally anticipated?
No, the total scheme is 4.8 million.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Stephen, thank you.
Thank you. On page 33, 1.3, when we're talking about the segregation of duty controls, it says management have implemented controls to recognise this lack of segregation, but KPMG feel unable to rely on the controls due to their informal nature. Are we, or can you assure us that something is being done about that to make sure that we don't see a statement like that next year?
So the standard build for our ERP system, Business World, is that there isn't a control in the system to oversee this. I suppose it's what's important to recognise is that a journal is effectively just a debit and a credit in the account. So you're not creating something that's false income or false expenditure. We've put in an informal process in that if a journal is required over a certain level, we have some internal sign-off on that. Rash can comment on their reliance on that, but we won't be able to change the system to put something in the system to create that segregation of duty. But I suppose we it needs to be considered alongside the risk, and probably Rash can comment on that if that helps. Rash.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this isn't something that's uncommon that we find in public sector organisations in the terms of the lack of segregation around journal control. And the reason why we raise it is because the risk that it's guarding against for us in management override, which is a standard significant risk all financial statement audits must have. So there's a high bar in terms of the audit evidence we need to support that. So even so Michelle's mentioned there that there is a control for journals above a certain level. If I was standing back and said if I wanted to navigate my way around that one, I'll just do multiple journals at a lower level to do that one. So that's why we have to under standards identify this control weakness, but we do build other procedures into our audit work to address that particular risk. So look at high risk criteria for journals, look at trends and so on and so forth. So we're comfortable that we'll get to a position we can sign off. We just have to do a little bit of extra work around designing appropriate audit procedures. But again, just to reiterate, it's not something that's particularly uncommon that we find in the public sector.
In terms of the journals, if we take your point, it could be very small adjustments, well, smaller adjustments that would trigger the control, if you like, for the higher value journals. But in terms of accountancy, journals are a very regular thing. It's not unusual. In fact, it's the bedrock in some ways of some of the final adjustments you have to make to a certain set of accounts. And I know, I'm just looking at Michelle here, you have said before you try and keep those to a minimum, Michelle, don't you? So most of them's direct posting, just if something needs, the control account needs something tweaking on it.
Yeah, so journals are absolutely the bedrock of what a lot of accountancy team do, and sometimes it's transferring expenditure if it's been miscoded, or as you say at year end where we need to do accruals and things like the depreciation journals and stuff like that. I think the risk that it poses is probably us misrepresenting the financial position of the council. And I can understand in the private sector that's more of an issue if you're misrepresenting the income that you're collecting or your profit or something like that. We have a certain group of people that are allowed to put journals in, so Andrew can't do it. And I'm not sure I'd know how to do it, to be quite honest. So there's a bit about the value of those journals that would be needed to actually be of benefit to misrepresent the accounts anyway, probably aren't able to be done by the people that would want to do them. But they are the level where we, KPMG will look absolutely at those high level journals and the purpose for doing them.
Yeah, like I said, I'm comfortable we design appropriate audit procedures to get the assurance we do. But we do need to raise it because it is a deficiency that we've identified and required as per the auditing standards. But to echo, we are able to design appropriate audit procedures to address the risk without that control being in place.
Thank you both. I think they're taking Michelle's point about the public sector. I think there was a big issue 2 or 3 years ago, 4 years ago, about the rebate income that some businesses were taking from gas contracts and things like that, and they were taking the revenue to bolster their profits in the current year and to sort of placate the shareholders. Those are the sort of things we're talking about. Obviously not applicable.
No, I think there was there a case quite a few years ago of Tesco misrepresenting income from from provisions and things like that. So yes, absolutely.
All the controls are there, but I think that's very reassuring. Thank you. Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just looking at the narrative report and just a general comment on projects. There's a lot of underspends being put up there, but the likelihood with inflation, etc., they could actually become overspends because projects are delayed, and that's really what I'm flagging up. They're here as underspends, but next year we could very well see that they're overspends due to valuations and other bits and pieces. Thank you.
I think that the monitoring of the capital programme, you're right, it's something that we do cautiously because recognise that any delay in delivery of projects can have an impact on the cost of those projects. Any underspends we have in year usually due to timing as opposed to the project's underspent. So it's something we keep an eye on and we are aware of, that it can cause delays, can cause additional costs.
Thank you. It's just an observation.
Yeah, just picking that up on page, is it 47, I think it is, the highway asset protection. You say there that there's a remaining element is due to a budget error. Is that to do with a calculation, or is it to do with some sort of systems issue there?
I think it's, I know it's an historic item that we just need to resolve. It's additional income that came in during 21-2 and wasn't represented correctly in the budget, so we just need to sort out that from the funding side and the service expenditure side. So not an issue with what they've done, it's just a technical error that we need to correct.
Just one question, Michelle. North Wycombe Relief Road, obviously we've had £14 million of expenditure on that to date, I understand, reading one of my emails the other day. If that didn't go ahead because of government funding decisions, so we say, because we can't possibly do it on our own, what would happen to the capital costs we'd accrued already? Thank you.
So there was two parts to the DFT funding announcements around North Wycombe Relief Road. So when the scheme was originally put forward, the DFT funding was arranged at £110 million. We progressed the scheme on that basis. We received further notification a bit further down the line on the after the HS2 stuff that we get an additional 40 million. Our budget at the moment recognises that we should be getting 110 million pounds of income from the Department for Transport, and we have been spending DFT money. So the 14 million you're referring to is grant that they've given us. So they've financed the majority of that, and that will just be a sunk cost. So if for some reason that scheme doesn't go ahead, that's a cost to the government effectively, and that they won't be able to recover that. So we've spent stuff on things that they've approved. I think we've had a funding item come in quite recently. I think Andrew mentioned we'd had something come in a couple of weeks ago. So they are still funding the progression of that scheme. It's just the additional 40 million that is more uncertain, and obviously once we get notification of that, we'll have to make a decision about whether that scheme can commence based on the funding that we might get or might not get from DFT.
This space, basically. Okay, thank you. Throwing it in the hands of others regarding that. Thank you. And just a very quick one. Obviously, we've got a bit of a transposition error there at note 19, but having said that, again, that's not an unusual occurrence when you do accounts. It divides by 9, you've got a transposition error. Okay, so is everyone happy with the report? So could I turn to the recommendations, and could I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Thank you. Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. Thank you. So those will be approved accordingly. So thank you, and thank you to Vash for his assistance in this as well, and Michelle. Thank you. So if we can now move to item 6, which is the Counter Fraud Progress Report. We have Mark. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, everybody. This report provides the committee with an overview of the progress made against the 24-25 counter-fraud plan, which was approved by the committee back in March. It summarises the progress made in relation to the plan's schedule of proactive counter-fraud work, records of the number of whistleblowing and confidential referrals received, and provides updates on the number of investigations completed during the year to date and financial recoveries to date. Some of the highlights from myself are that since April of this year, we've received 12 referrals of potential suspected fraud, and that compares to 18 for the whole of last year, 23-24. In relation to progress, we have completed 25% of our proactive work, with 6% in progress and 69% yet to be completed, and that was from the 1st of August of this year. Again, as a bit of a highlight, during interviews for the Fraud Risk Register and any interactions that we have with any colleagues across LCC, we encourage those to take up the training on links to learn in relation to counter-fraud. In the first quarter of this year, 66 staff have completed the training in the first quarter. That may not seem a lot, but in comparison to last year in the quarter, it is 471% up. So I obviously submit this report for you to note the progress made and any associated use of resource delivery, and to note any and raise any questions in relation to the discharging of LCC's fraud responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I'm sorry I kept my microphone on. Might have disturbed yours a little bit. Thank you very much. Andrew.
Congratulations, Mark. Good training increase. I'm now going to be really churlish. It's a very assuring report. Not a lot of fraud detected. What you find, you grip, etc. The trouble with your field of work is you don't know how much you don't know, and you don't know whether the bad guys are getting more clever and you haven't spotted it yet, etc. So we'll never answer that conundrum, but it appears you've got a good grip on things. But the numbers seem relatively low. Is that indicative of the culture created, the training, the action when you spot something, and therefore the grapevine soon learns don't even try it, sunshine? And I just wondered whether or not you've compared yourself with the best other authorities around the country, because we aspire to be the best or one of the best, and whether or not you share best practice and investigative alerts and suspicions with them to give you comfort that 12 in 6 months is not too low or too high or whatever.
Thank you. We're currently waiting to have the first meeting of a regional counter-fraud managers that will cover the county. So once I'm actually there, then I can find out how the others are performing and how we are able to perform in direct relation to them and how we can compare. I think probably the key for me is communication. And within the first quarter, I think we've communicated well with colleagues in relation to taking up the training to help them identify what a fraud is. Obviously, fraud is a crime. It's important that when we interact, whether it be through the fraud risk registers, that again, we try to point out and assist our colleagues across LCC. And I have to say, with the amount of referrals we've had that have been very positive, where colleagues have identified as a result of conversations that we've had, and we've been able to assist them in putting in controls to address those issues. As you rightfully say, sometimes there will be matters that we don't know, that we haven't identified, but I'm hoping that as we progress with our proactive work, that anything that we identify as a potential for a loss or for a fraud, that we can assist our colleagues moving forward in trying to address those issues. I hope that answers your question.
The number of possible frauds you mentioned has gone up. Well, it hasn't gone up because we're not fully there, but it looks like it's more than it was in the comparable period of the previous year. Is that a result of your training? Or is that a result of your resources being more active? Or is it just that there's more fraud taking place?
Thank you. I'd like to think it's because of our positive interactions that we're having with our colleagues across LCC whilst we're conducting the fraud risk register, whilst we're having meetings. We have a counter-fraud representatives meeting that's quarterly. We pass on information to our colleagues that they will then take back to their relative areas. And the referrals, we class them as anybody who's coming to us with a question around a process, a potential loss. So it's not necessarily always a fraud, but what is encouraging is they're having those conversations with us. So I think it's a positive.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at the employee expense reviews, Mark, and obviously this is just we have 150 there, about 500, which would in breach of the expenses policy. But having said that, you know, again, you've addressed that by saying, you know, you're looking at that through training, etc. There were sort of people not being aware really of what the claim should probably have been, but sort of how often are employees reminded, or could you advise us, perhaps you're aware of that, of the actual procedures for expense claims? Obviously there will be notes in the system and everything when they're filling them in.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so once again, we will review them on a monthly basis. As a direct result of our reviews, we will take a sample and then we will speak with managers and staff and just highlight where we believe that the policy hasn't been followed. As a result of that, then, we've been fortunate where any mistakes have been rectified. I sit down on a monthly basis with HR payroll and we will address any of those mistakes that have been identified, and then they will look to try to resolve those issues. So again, it's positive discussions and interacting with our colleagues across LCC that has resulted in you know, us hopefully addressing some of the issues. And again, when we're talking about communication, so we will send out our own communications, but we also work again with the likes of HR Payroll, who, based on what our discussions are on a monthly basis, they also will reiterate the message within their own messages that they send out. And those are emailed to all staff.
Thank you, Mark. Just a slight further point on your remarks at the first paragraph on page 271. Obviously, again, an issue in the media of late has been dual employment, perhaps of some employees. Are there any circumstances where a dual employment is acceptable and agreed with management, or is it just a blanket no-go area? And again, how are we monitoring that in terms of people, particularly from the working from home issue?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, no, certainly within the Council there are those that will be able to have another employment. And I think the key here is notification to your manager, as per the policy, to make an early declaration. And we look at that then, is there a conflict of interest in relation to the current role they're in? And I think that's probably has been, or was the stumbling block, was when this individual obviously hasn't notified their management. But we have got policies and procedures in place for that. And again, highlighted as a result of this investigation is now within the recruitment phase, is a question that is positively asked to clarify very early on and to highlight the fact that, you know, if you have got, you need to declare to us.
And I know from experience in the private sector, you know, it's if employers declare that at the outset, then arrangements can either be made one way or another, but everybody needs to know where they stand, really. So that's wonderful. Thank you very much, Andrew.
This is not a question to Mark, Chair. It's triggered by your illustration of working from home as a potential area of concern. I seem to recall, was it 18 months or so ago, the Chief Exec sat over there and said you'd just started implementation of your flexible working strategy. And of course, that's the big question. Do you get more or less out of staff by being flexible? Where is that strategy in terms of its review and evaluation to see whether or not it is delivering what we want as a council?
Yeah, I'll come in and try to answer that. So yeah, so we're in a bit of a hybrid situation at the moment. As you know, be aware, if you've tried to get into the car park this morning, there's a lot of building work going on outside whilst we're refurbishing Orchard House B. So we aren't in the full final model of how we envisage hybrid working for Lincolnshire County Council at the moment. That will only truly be able to be possible once Orchard House B is open, which will be early in the new year. So the policy we've got in and is working generally is that we will have our teams coming together 1 to 2 days a week. Opening Orchard House B will allow that to be 2 days a week broadly across the board based on the numbers of staff that we've got. So that'll be the point that we'll be able to properly evaluate the usage of that. We've obviously put, when Tony Kavanagh's been here, our Assistant Director for HR, he's been able to feed back on how we've strengthened things like the one-to-one process, the appraisal process, to ensure that you know, we've got up and down sort of feedback going on in terms of how that process is working. But I say in the more broader sense, in terms of how this organisation's worked post-COVID, you know, we are still well performing, aren't we? We've had numerous inspections that have come through since 2020, you know, continuation of the strong Ofsted judgments, CQC inspection reports, and obviously delivery of council services well within budget still, as we've seen in the various reports. So in the broadest sense, the organisation's dealt well with it and we're continuing to perform strongly, I'd say. But final position, not there yet until that building's open.
Is there a date set for when you will say, we've run it long enough now, are we looking at N25 or later to say our considered position is this model of hybridity is optimal?
Yeah, so I think if we're opening in spring 2025, obviously you'd need to give it a period of time to let it run. So, you know, at least a year, I would have thought. So to work your way through the seasons, I think, would be my advice to anybody asking that question of us. But
Can do it. Thank you, Andrew. Mark.
Just carrying on with what the question was and what your response has been, do we have the office space remaining to actually reverse the decision and bring everybody back into the office 5 days a week?
So obviously we're in midway through a rationalisation programme at the moment. So we've been set a policy objective which appeared in the current administration's manifesto to reduce office building space to the tune of 30%. So we are in the process of delivering that at the moment. So by the time we've delivered that programme, the answer would probably be no. As it stands, and we'd obviously, if there was a need to work 5 days a week, we'd obviously have to look at alternative options to deliver that.
And that's going to be taken into account in the review of overall performance associated with the policy.
Thank you both. Obviously, there's going to quite likely be changes in government legislation as well, so that's going to be presumably something, Andrew, that will have to be addressed as and when that occurs in terms of statutory rights to flexible working, etc. So we'll probably just have to wait and see, won't we, how that goes. Okay, so thank you, everyone. Any further questions? No? Okay, so thank you to Mark. Very interesting and thorough report as usual. And so we have the recommendations to note the progress made and associated use of the delivery and to raise any questions discharging LCC's forward responsibilities. I think we've covered those. So propose and second, please. Seconded. Those in favour? Thank you. Okay. So again, we're back to Mark once again, and we have the item 7, which is the counter fraud and anti-corruption policy review. Mark, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The purpose of this report is to present the revised counter-fraud and anti-corruption policy to yourselves, the Audit Committee. This policy has been reviewed by counter-fraud staff, the Head of Internal Audit, the Assistant Director HR and Organisational Resources, the Monitoring Officer and the Corporate Leadership Team prior to submission to yourselves. The policy has been reviewed to align with best practice and with HR processes across the Council. Fraud, bribery and/or corruption are criminal offences, and the allegations can have, obviously, a criminal foundation to them. As a result, they require additional processes to preserve evidence and data sources, as well as being delivered and managed by professionally trained and adequately experienced staff, with an expectation to secure the best outcomes for the Council and provide professional equity. Amendments to the policy include consistent use of language throughout the policy, the updated definition of fraud, and an updated explanation of corruption. So we recommend that the policy be approved by the committee for the implementation across the Council and be used to inform any subsequent constitution review to develop one consistent approach across the Council. If anybody has any questions, thank you.
Well, I think bearing in mind what's happening in the media at the moment and at conferences and various other locations, it's probably very good to have a firm policy regarding bribery and corruption. But I have a question, and I'm very glad to see that we've got one that seems to be fairly robust, and I think local government on a whole has been a lot more robust than some other organisations involved in governance. I have a question though. If a gift is provided and it is declared, does that automatically make it not a bribe?
Like anything else, it would be the mens rea that would be behind that gift and what the thought process is. But we do, there are gifts that are received both by officers and members, and they are currently recorded and declared. But that, again, without knowing what the mens rea behind the person giving that gift and the person receiving it, it would be hard for me to comment on that.
I'll let you off. I won't pursue that because I think it's quite plain in lots of circumstances it may well be considered to be a bribe, but it does depend on the organisation and the organisation's view of bribery.
Andrew.
Councillor Allen's question and recent newspaper headlines. Has the council reviewed its gifts and hospitality strategy and policy recently to ensure that there are no negative headlines that could possibly come the way of Lincolnshire County Council?
That's not a policy that certainly that I am responsible for. I am aware that I'm led to believe that it is currently probably being looked at, and we would also contribute to any revision of that policy that we could.
Thank you, Mark. I think anecdotally, from a member's perspective, over recent years, since I became a councillor on Lincolnshire County Council several years ago, the incidence of any gifts or hospitality are extremely limited, if nearly non-existent. So,
I think it's only
from a member's point of view.
only few and far between because of the way that we operate, which is probably very professional and in line with the guidance, which is quite firm. It's just that I would like to know, you know, if I possibly declared a 5-day stay in Manhattan over New Year at a cost of you know £1,300, whether that would be sufficient, because it seems to be in some organisations all you have to do. I'm not wearing a suit. I can't afford one, but I would buy my own.
But I think that, you know, jesting aside, gentlemen, Mark's right. This is a policy for, and Michelle is going to advise us what that is. But I say we are very robust.
I think we are robust, but the thing to probably remember is the governance around our decision making as well. So if you declare that, you know, week stay in Manhattan or whatever, the thing that would be asked is what decisions are you making and what decisions are you influencing? And I know as part of our contracting process and commercial process, we have questions asked about people's relationships and anything that might influence their decisions. So if the governance is strong around the decision making, then the gifts and hospitality is kind of sitting in the background, I think, a little bit as well. So just probably worth bearing that in mind about how that might influence the decision and the governance we have around that decision making.
Chair, I can't escape the residual image of 25 years, I think, ago it was, when Doncaster councillors went en masse to catered days at Doncaster Racecourse, etc. It did for that authority at the time. Nothing like that would ever happen in Lincolnshire, would it?
The only instance I'm aware of councils all going on a bus somewhere is usually to visit a planning area or a project or something like that, and I'm sure members might have been involved in that if they've been involved in other committees, but certainly not to hospitality events.
Just for general information, the monitoring officer is doing a review of the constitution. And internal audit are involved in that process. So I don't know what they're actually looking at. I've only got part of the programme, but I would expect that they're looking at it in its entirety to make it stronger if it's available.
So as I say, from an anecdotal point of view, I think certainly in terms of members, there's any gift issues or anything like that are very, very limited indeed. And then they have quite a low level of declaration anyway. But the opportunity wouldn't be available, I suspect. Anyway, thank you. So we have the policy there. So thank you again to Mark. So we have the recommendation that we approve the implementation of the policy throughout the council, and we use that to inform a constitution accordingly. So do I have a seconder? Proposer and seconder? Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. So, members, if we can then move on to, again, a relevant topic in our risk management report at item 8. We have Kevin, who's going to run us through that, with the proviso that I believe Appendix C is exempt, so we won't refer to that in public. If we do, we'll have to go into closed session. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee members. This is our latest risk management progress report, which includes an update on the strategic risks and updates on some of the team's activities. Excuse me. This round has seen a few changes to the way the strategic risk register is strategic risks are structured, and that was following the recommendation that we split the market supply risks. So we've actually gone a little bit further and split them a bit further and made some adjustments across those. So I'll run through the main changes that I draw your attention to. So the education travel risk has been taken down from a critical impact risk down to a major impact risk. That is because it would have a major impact on the budget rather than a critical impact on the council's budget, i.e. it wouldn't cripple the councils and stop us from operating. Equally, it's a statutory duty, so we would never not deliver those children to school. We simply have to take the budget hit. But on the back of that, a strategic education travel board has been set up to look into mitigations for the risk. And I'm aware that a transformation programme is starting at the minute with support from performance teams and the commercial teams within the Resources Directorate. So everybody's supporting that service at the moment. The market supply risk has been split into three. So market supply children's risk is the highest of the risks at the moment due to the potential impacts, obviously, of the market supply risk with children. It's always a quite high impact. Currently limited assurance, which we discussed at the last progress report as well. That is showing a trend with national pressures. Every council, I believe, is facing this risk at the moment. The adults market supply risk is currently at adequate assurance. And the third market supply risk we have is an education high needs block. So you'll recall the market supply was previously adults, children's and education, and this is the education's element of that market supply risk. So it's separated out due to the possibility of LCC overspending within that block budget. However, we do have a statutory override which allows the council to remain in a deficit. Hopefully I've phrased that correctly with the head of finance sat right next to me. Thank you. The impact for that risk is a little bit lower due to that override, as you'll see on the strategic risk register. We've reworded the strategic contracts risk on this review. We think it better describes the risk. It's currently sat at limited assurance, and that is due to the inability to control some aspects of contract failure, and they're currently making improvements to oversight by the contracts team and the training provided across the council to contract managers as well. Another change on this review is the increase in likelihood for the safeguarding adults risk. So that's changed from a possible to a 3 likely on this review. And that's due to the increased demand and challenges with staffing and recruitment within the care sector in general. Assurance for this round was dropped to adequate. However, when looking at controls, there are a few new and developing controls. One of those is to create essentially a front door triaging and ensuring that adults are directed to the correct area. So the increase in demand was not always relevant to the county council and should have been directed elsewhere on other occasions. And that new control is being implemented now, and it's hoped that at the next review that score will drop back down. So that's the strategic risks. In terms of activities, we're still working on developing risk indicators with the education travel team. They have a dashboard built by the performance team. I've got a meeting in 2 weeks to look at which indicators would be key for us to look at, and those will be included and start feeding into that strategic risk as well. We've improved our performance monitoring as well, so we've got a quality assurance process within our team which reviews both our team's performance and also the quality of risk information that we hold, and it's hoped that that will develop the training we provide to the council across the board based on areas that we identify we might be slightly lacking in risk information. For example, maybe we need improved controls or improved description within those controls. That's where we see that going. We have also developed and pasted in a couple of screenshots of the risk dashboard that we're looking to roll out across the council to senior executives, not councillors, senior officers, etc., who need to see risk information for their services. So we're looking to potentially roll that out to heads of services, ADs and EDs, but we're going to discuss that at Corporate Risk and Safety Steering Group at the next session that we have, which I believe is November. We've also spent some time on this review updating the terms of reference for that group to ensure it's fit for purpose. They were due an update, and we've simply updated. They'll go back to corporate risk and safety in November as well. That's everything for me. Hopefully that's covered everything. If you have any questions, happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Paul and then Mark. Thank you.
I just, the health of the nation seems to be getting worse almost daily. And that's a consequence, I think, of unknown or ignored, I should say, effects associated with the pandemic and the way the pandemic was operated. And there's probably other things as well post-pandemic, but it does seem to be that children's mental health is deteriorating quite significantly as a proportion of the population, the schools, the children's population. And there is an element of that in the adult population as well, with large proportions of the population off work for various reasons, but a lot of it to do with mental health care as well as other things. And I just wondered whether that's going to have an effect in the longer term as those people create more demands on the council in terms of care, and as children become adults and move into the adult care area, and whether we are in a position to track costs and expected costs and where that's going to lead the council, and whether there is additional funds being likely to be made available centrally to cover those sort of situations, or whether the National Health Service is actually going to get its act together and actually start addressing the issues from a health point of view, or whether it's just going to lead us into difficult situations over the forthcoming future as these effects become financially a burden to the council, that is.
So looking at the children's side, it's that and some other reasons are the reason for some of the increased demand as far as I've seen from the risks that they hold at the minute. But I am aware that they have, you'll notice one of the controls is the chat data set, and we had a quick look at that not too long back from one of their heads of service showed us it, and it is rife with data and information. They use a lot of data to forecast where they're going to be in the forthcoming years, but they also do the same with education, so they take birth rates as well. So they'll be able to forecast when children are coming into school, expected number of children coming into school for that side as well. But you are right, what they're seeing is an increase in the number of SEND children as well, and I imagine it will trip over into adults as well. Obviously, I can't comment on how they'll react and respond within the directorate, but from the way they manage their risks currently and the look at their controls that they currently hold, it looks like they're well placed to deal with that upcoming, and obviously, hopefully, something will happen with the NHS.
If I might add to Councillor Allen's concern, which I think is extremely well placed, I see this from two perspectives. One, as a secondary academy governor in Retford, where at least 10% and growing of the children in school are not fully functioning because of disengagement, despair, all sorts of conditions exacerbated by COVID, along with the inability to get CAMS, child and adolescent mental health services, because there hasn't been a proportionate investment in those. Then I see them at the young adult end, chairing the Complex Cases Committee for Derbyshire ICB, and we are talking of £10,000 to £15,000 per week for the most challenged child in secure accommodation with 3-to-1 staffing, etc., etc. And what I despair at is I do not see an NHS or an integrated care system response to it. So could I ask that somebody raises Councillor Allen's challenge, very well evidenced challenge, which I think Kevin is not disagreeing with, in the ICB context, because that is the vehicle that should have an answer to this growing demand area. And I'm not seeing that ICB response, not specifically in Lincolnshire, but in anywhere at the moment. All we can do in Derbyshire is, rather than have an admission into hospital or put the life of that child at risk, we have to pay the bill, which is typically in the private sector. And they can name their price because there isn't supply to meet demand. And it's got to be the ICB that looks at this strategically and long term and decides, what are we going to do with these most vulnerable and dependent people in society?
Andrew, Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll add a little bit on that as well, because we're talking about home working. You know, this is where the systems around the workers have to balance for both mental health and support of the individual from the development side, etc. And that is key, because remember, you know, happy family, hopefully happy child as well. So it's about the wrap round of whole families. And you mentioned the boards that are supposed to treat the whole patient. Well, I think it's only the Chinese 2,000 years ago that were treating the whole patient, but there we go. What I was going to talk about was actually the educational transport risk. You know, Lincolnshire with its isolated communities, it's 5,500 miles of road. And on top of that, it's not just educational transport that's going to suffer with the actual on cost of per mile. It'll, you know, we've got a low cost economy, low wage economy, and quite a lot of burden coming our way. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you to Kevin. Yeah, obviously, the mental health issues and everything, obviously, you know, that's issues where taken up at the County Council through the Health and Wellbeing Board, Andrew, in terms of things that Councillor Sue Woolley and Wendy Burke are doing at both ends of the spectrum. Yeah, the care for young children issue is a really thorny one, isn't it? And I think I was listening to an article on the news yesterday, and they were interviewing a gentleman who was from a regional African community, and said it was the responsibility of the entire village to bring up a child. So I think it comes down to, you know, anecdotally, when the ones of us who are older in the room here, you know, that was the case for the baby boomers. You know, we were your entire community did parent you with your children, with your own parents as well. I think that's a sad indictment that we've lost a lot of that, and children feel very vulnerable and isolated, and we should be protecting them more than anything else, because that's everybody's future. Okay, so we've got the report here. We've got any further questions? I've just got a couple of things I'd like to ask Kevin.
It's a way of summarising sort of the questions that we've raised with you, because I think as far as the report's concerned, in terms of strategic risks, I think the ability is there, and indeed is happening, to actually identify them. But what worries me is you could have a very high risk that's going to cost you £10,000 to resolve, or you can have a very high risk that's going to cost you £10 million to resolve, or is becomes so expensive, you know, it takes it outside our own budgets almost. And I don't know how those elements are going to be addressed, because there does seem to be growing problems in our community and nationally, but not unusual, although we have special circumstances that might add to the difficulties that we can see happening, but we don't necessarily know what the solution is or how expensive they're going to be. So I hope that that message that's perhaps coming from the committee can be broadcast, you know, within the directorate, so that we do and try and address them or take them into account as much as possible, so that we're not caught out, you know, over the long term.
Thank you, Mark.
I think you know what's coming up.
Kevin.
Yeah, just to reassure you that we do have risk registers at directorate level, service level throughout the council. Obviously, the combined risk report that you'll get in February will show you the key themes coming out of those risks as well. Just to give you an example, so for example, a £10,000 risk would probably be sat at service level, managed by the correct service, usually within resources, because unfortunately for Andrew, they have all those corporate style risks that cover the whole council but may cost less money to deal with. But they are looking at the risks to their statutory duties as well. So when they're doing their risk management at service directorate and strategic level, it's always against their statutory duties and their requirements. So some things within neighbourhoods, for example, may not fall within their remit, but they obviously feel the impacts of those changes to the way neighbourhoods work, and they're considered at service and directorate level, usually. And unfortunately, we just don't report those to audit committee. Hopefully that answers or helps.
Thank you, Kevin. Just on going back to the children's safeguarding and everything as well, do we take any account, Kevin, of the falling birth rates that we have in the county or in our sphere of influence, if you will, in terms of you know, cohorts coming through into primary schools and the likely pressure on the services going forward? Is that likely to be relieved, or do we see that staying as it is? Thank you.
So the education AD area have all the data on birth rates, etc., and they factor it into their school provision, and they use that to predict and then build schools accordingly. So you'll have seen special needs schools built recently by the county council as well. So often that data that they get through Children's is used to inform where they would put those schools and ensure they're in the correct location, hopefully.
Thank you, Kevin. Have we any further questions? No. Struggling with it a little bit. I'm pressing it down harder. So we have the recommendation that the current status of strategic risk facing the council, we sought strategic assurance over that, and the changes to the combined market supply risk now being 3 risks: market supply for the children's and the high needs block. And we have obviously items 3 and 4, the amended wording of the strategic contracts risk and the risk management activity is confirmed, and any further action required is identified. So thank you. So do I have a proposal and second of that? Thank you. Okay, all those in favour? Thank you, Mark. So we are now moving on to the final item, which is our work programme. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the work programme is showing the running order for the rest of this academic year, financial year, and it's been updated to include the global internal audit standards training that will be delivered after November meeting, along with the counter fraud awareness training that Mark will deliver at the same time. Other than that, there have been no changes than what had been prior agreed.
Thank you, Claire. Have we any other questions for Claire? Thank you.
Just clarification, are you assuming that these hour-long sessions would be before a 10 a.m. meeting or after a meeting finishes at, say, 12?
So the one for November is an afternoon session, so there'll be sort of an hour from me and an hour or so from Mark after lunch on the day of the committee meeting.
We've got that one, which is I'm just looking at my diary here, the Global Internal Audit Standards and Counter Fraud one, which was one we're doing at 11th of November committee meeting. We're starting that at 2, Andrew, so obviously we'll have some lunch in between the main meeting and that, and then come back to do that summit of an all-day event. Okay, thank you. So any further comments on this? No? So do we approve the work plan?
Yes.
For the recommendation, thank you. Thank you, all those in favour, thank you. So that's been quite a speedy meeting. We've got lots of information there, but obviously some of that we've looked at on prior occasions. So I thank everyone for attending today, and do have a safe trip home. I don't think the Armageddon of the weather is yet hit us. Hopefully it won't. So keep dry, okay? So, and have a safe trip back. Thank you. Bye-bye.